What if the problem isn't your life? What if the problem is what you're absolutely sure about? What if some of the beliefs guiding your decisions, your reactions, your fears, your confidence are not truths, but stories you repeated so many times they started feeling like reality? And the most uncomfortable question of all, what if you are not suffering because life is unfair, because something you believe is completely wrong? Stay with me, because this might change how you see everything. Human beings live by belief, not facts, beliefs. The mind builds interpretations, assumptions, expectations, and then treats them like unquestionable truth. This is who I am. This is what people are like. This is what success looks like. And once a belief settles deep enough, the brain stops questioning it. It becomes identity, reality, certainty. But here's the danger no one likes to confront. Belief does not equal truth. Something can feel true, look true, sound true, and still be completely false. And most people never stop to ask, who told me this was true? Why do I believe this? What if I'm wrong? Because certainty feels safe, doubt feels terrifying, yet growth lives on the other side of doubt. One of the most dangerous beliefs a human being can quietly carry, without even realizing how destructive it is the simple, innocent-sounding sentence, "This is just how I am." It doesn't sound rebellious. It doesn't sound arrogant. It sounds honest, realistic, even humble. But hidden inside that sentence is something incredibly heavy: resignation. Because the moment you tell yourself that this is just who I am, you stop negotiating with your potential. You stop challenging your habits. You stop fighting your weaknesses. And slowly, you stop believing that transformation is even possible. You begin to wear your flaws like identity badges. I'm lazier. I'm always like this. I can't stay consistent. I'm not disciplined. I've tried before. This is my nature. And what makes this belief so dangerous is that it often feels true. Your past provides evidence. Your failures provide proof. Your repeated mistakes build a convincing story. But truth is not always built on memory. Sometimes it's built on interpretation. And your mind is incredibly skilled at confusing familiarity with inevitability. Just because you've been a certain way for years does not mean that version of you is permanent. Yet the brain loves stability even when stability is painful, because change requires discomfort, and discomfort threatens the ego. So instead of confronting the difficulty of growth, the mind builds a comfortable prison. Identity. This is just who I am. And once identity settles, effort begins to feel pointless. Why fight what feels fixed? Why struggle against what feels written? Why demand change from yourself when you've already accepted defeat at the level of belief? But here is what this belief completely ignores. Human beings are not static creations. Islam does not describe you as a finished product. It describes you as a being in constant motion, constantly tested, constantly refined, constantly invited back, constantly capable of renewal. The entire spiritual framework is built on the idea that a person can fall 1,000 times and still rise different. That weakness is not destiny. That habits are not identity. That your current self is not your final self. When you say this is just how I am, what you are often really saying is that this is how I have been. And those are two radically different statements. One is a description of the past. The other is a verdict on the future. And confusing the two is where people lose years of growth. Because once you accept limitation as identity, your brain stops looking for solutions. Laziness becomes personality. The fear becomes nature. Inconsistency becomes character. You no longer see these as problems to solve. You see them as truths to tolerate. And this quiet surrender bleeds into everything. Your worship, your ambitions, your discipline, your relationship with Allah, your self-respect. You begin to expect less from yourself. You begin to excuse more. You begin to shrink your vision of what you could become. Yet history and revelation repeatedly prove something else entirely. The human being is designed for transformation. Hearts harden and soften. Sinners become saints. The lost become guided. The weak become strong. Not because their nature changed overnight, but because their beliefs about themselves did. Because the greatest barrier to change is rarely ability. It is self-definition. The moment you stop saying, "This is just how I am," and start saying, "This is something I struggle with," everything shifts. Struggle implies movement. Identity implies permanence. Struggle implies hope. Identity implies conclusion. And Allah responds to effort, not labels. Growth begins not when your behavior changes, but when your internal narrative changes. When you stop treating your weaknesses like destiny and start treating them like battles. Because the tragedy is not that a human being has flaws. The tragedy is when a human being decides those flaws are final. And the moment that belief breaks, the moment you genuinely accept that you are not trapped by your past patterns, that you are not defined by your worst days, that discipline can be built, that consistency can be learned, that strength can be developed. That change is not a personality trait, but a process. That is the moment a person reclaims control of their future, because you were never created to remain the same. You were created to evolve, refine, struggle, return, fall, rise, and move. Always move towards something better than who you used to be. One of the most comforting and most dangerously deceptive beliefs a person can carry is the quiet reassurance whispered by the mind. I still have time. I still have time. It feels harmless, logical, even reasonable. After all, you're not rejecting change, not denying repentance, not refusing improvement. You're simply postponing it. Later, soon, or when things settle, or when I'm older, or when life is less busy, when I'm ready. And that's what makes this belief so lethal. It does not feel like disobedience. It feels like patience. But hidden beneath this illusion is a subtle gamble with something no human being has ever controlled: tomorrow. Because I still have time is not a fact. It is an assumption dressed as certainty. It is the mind treating uncertainty like a guarantee. And the human brain is extraordinarily skilled at this kind of self-deception. It softens urgency. It dulls awareness. It converts critical decisions into optional ones. The uncomfortable effort of change becomes negotiable. The weight of repentance becomes delayable. The seriousness of life becomes blurred by the fantasy of abundance. But reality operates by a rule no one escapes. Time is never promised. It is only experienced. No one has ever held tomorrow in their hands. No one has ever received a contract guaranteeing another year, another month, another prayer, another breath, yet the ego craves continuity. It resists confronting fragility. So instead of acknowledging how uncertain life truly is, the mind builds psychological comfort. There's still time. And once urgency dissolves, transformation loses momentum. Sins become habits. Habits become lifestyles. Lifestyles become identities. Not because change was impossible, but because delay felt safer than discomfort. And the most tragic part, delay always feels justified in the present. There is always a reason, always a distraction, always a temporary excuse that somehow stretches into years. Shoots. I'll start praying properly when life gets stable. I'll fix my habits when stress reduces. I'll become serious about Allah when I'm older. But stability never arrives the way you imagine it. Life does not slow down. It accelerates. Responsibilities multiply. Distractions evolve. And the version of you that kept saying later slowly becomes someone who no longer feels the urgency at all. Because delay is not neutral. It reshapes the heart. Every postponed repentance slightly weakens sensitivity. Every ignored reminder slightly softens conviction. Every delayed correction slightly strengthens resistance. Until one day the danger is no longer that you are delaying change. It is that change no longer feels necessary. This is the terrifying power of time illusions. They make spiritual drift feel safe. But Islam repeatedly shatters this false comfort by anchoring the believer in a brutal but liberating truth. You are not living towards certainty. You are living inside uncertainty. Death is not scheduled. Transformation is not automatically triggered by age. Regret does not wait politely for readiness. The heart does not stay forever receptive. And the greatest mistake a person can make is not failing to change. It is believing they can safely postpone change indefinitely. Because I still have time quietly assumes something profoundly dangerous, that your future self will have more strength, more discipline, more motivation, more sincerity than your present self. But why would that be true if nothing changes today? Delay does not build readiness, action does. Urgency does. Confrontation does. And the irony is devastating. The moment you stop assuming you have unlimited time is the moment your decisions gain power. The moment you genuinely accept that this prayer could be your last opportunity to reconnect, that this repentance could be your last window to cleanse the heart, that this moment, this exact moment, is the only one guaranteed to exist, everything shifts. Focus sharpens, priorities rearrange. Distractions lose authority because awareness of uncertainty does not create fear. It creates clarity. It removes illusion. It forces honesty. And it awakens a truth most people spend years avoiding. Later is a story, but now is reality. And transformation only lives in reality. One of the most subtle traps the human mind falls into is not the justification of major wrongs, but the quiet dismissal of minor ones. The gentle, almost invisible belief that small sins don't really matter. It sounds reasonable. After all, they're small, right? Not catastrophic, not shocking, not shocking. Not life-destroying, just tiny compromises, tiny indulgences, tiny slips, a glance here, a word there, a delay, a habit, a moment, something that feels too insignificant to carry spiritual weight. And this is precisely where the danger lives, not in the size of the action, but in the gradual reshaping of the heart. Because sins are rarely destructive in isolation. They are destructive in accumulation. A human brain has a remarkable ability to normalize repetition. What once triggered guilt begins to feel ordinary. What once disturbed the conscience becomes background noise. The first time feels heavy. The 10th time feels lighter. The 100th time feels natural. Not because the act changed, but because your sensitivity did. And small sins are masters of this psychological erosion. They do not crash into your life like disasters. They seep in quietly. They integrate gently. They camouflage as harmless routines. And over time, they begin to perform their most dangerous work, desensitization. Because the greatest spiritual catastrophe is not committing a sin. It is losing the ability to feel that it is a sin. When something wrong stops feeling wrong, the internal alarm system weakens. The heart's resistance softens. The line between obedience and carelessness blurs. And the tragedy is that people rarely notice this shift happening. No one wakes up intending to numb their heart. No one consciously decides to weaken their conscience. It happens gradually, through things considered too small to worry about. But Islam repeatedly warns against this exact illusion. Not because small sins are equal to major ones, but because of what small sins become when ignored. Habits, patterns, lifestyle, identity. A drop of water seems powerless until it falls thousands of times on the same surface. A tiny crack seems harmless until pressure builds. A minor compromise seems trivial until discipline collapses. Spiritual decay operates by the same law. Each small sin is not just an action. It is a vote for a slightly weaker resistance, a slightly softer guilt, a slightly quieter conscience. And when these votes accumulate, the heart slowly shifts allegiance, not dramatically, but subtly, away from vigilance, away from awareness, away from carefulness with Allah. What makes this belief so deceptive is that it hides behind comparison. At least I'm not doing worse. Others are doing bigger sins. This is nothing serious, but spiritual health is not measured by comparing your darkness to someone else's darkness. It is measured by comparing your actions to truth. And small sins carry a unique danger because they often feel safe enough to repeat, but powerful enough to reshape. They dull mindfulness. They weaken discipline. They slowly erode the internal discomfort that protects faith. Until one day, the real danger is no longer the sin itself. It is the heart that no longer trembles, the heart that negotiates easily, the heart that feels distant but cannot explain why. Because distance from Allah is rarely built through dramatic rebellion. It is built through gradual carelessness. Through accumulated moments over this is not a big deal. Yet here is the overlooked truth most people fail to see. Small acts of obedience accumulate too. Just as minor wrongs shape the heart, minor corrections purify it, lowering the gaze once, guarding the tongue once, resisting temptation once, remembering Allah once, seeking forgiveness once. No action is truly small when it is repeated, because repetition is what transforms moments into character. And the believer who understands this lives differently, not obsessively fearful, but consciously aware, recognizing that spiritual strength is not lost in disasters, but in drifts, not shattered in explosions, but worn away in fragments. Because the issue was never whether the sin was small. The issue is what repeated small choices slowly turn you into. One of the most comforting illusions the human mind clings to is the belief that my intentions are good, so I'm fine. It is a belief wrapped in sincerity, coated in optimism, and protected by the ego's deep desire to feel morally safe. Because intention feels pure and invisible, personal, something no one else can challenge. Allah knows my heart. I mean well. I'm not a bad person. I have good intentions. And while intention in Islam holds extraordinary importance, this belief becomes dangerous when it quietly transforms from humility into justification. Because good intentions do not automatically neutralize harmful actions, repeated neglect, or consistent disobedience. Yet the mind loves this shortcut. It loves separating internal sincerity from external responsibility. It creates a psychological shield where a person can feel spiritually secure without confronting behavioral contradictions. You begin to measure yourself by what you feel rather than what you consistently do. Yes, I struggle with prayer, but my heart is clean. Yes, I commit certain sins, but I have good intentions. Yes, I delay change, but Allah knows I mean well. And slowly, sincerity, something meant to drive transformation, becomes the excuse preventing transformation. This is the subtle trap of self-perception. Humans naturally judge themselves by intentions, but judge others by actions. Your inner motives feel vivid, complex, emotionally charged. Your mistakes feel contextual, understandable, forgivable. But actions operate by consequences, not narratives. Reality does not bend to how pure something feels internally. Islam never separated belief from practice, sincerity from effort, intention from striving. Because true intention is not proven by emotion. It is proven by direction. A heart that genuinely intends obedience moves, even if slowly. It struggles, even if imperfectly. It resists, even if inconsistently. But when intention becomes comfort rather than fuel, stagnation begins to masquerade as sincerity. And what makes this belief so psychologically seductive is that it preserves self-image. It allows a person to avoid the painful friction of self-confrontation. Because acknowledging misalignment between intention and action requires discomfort. It requires admitting that feeling good is not the same as being aligned. That wanting goodness is not the same as pursuing it. That sincerity without movement slowly decays into illusion. The ego despises this realization. It prefers emotional reassurance over behavioral accountability. But Islam repeatedly disrupts this comfort by tying sincerity directly to effort. Perfect. Not flawlessness, striving. Because human beings are designed to struggle, not to remain frozen behind beautiful self-descriptions. Even Shaitan does not always attack through open rebellion. Sometimes he attacks through comforting distortions, making a person feel spiritually safe while gradually drifting. Making intention feel like completion rather than beginning. But here is the reality most people resist hearing. Good intentions are not a destination. They are a responsibility. They are the starting line, not the finish line. A sincere heart does not say, I mean well, therefore I am safe. A sincere heart says, I mean well, therefore I must move. Because the tragedy is not hypocrisy. It is unconscious self-deception. It is believing alignment exists simply because desire exists. Yet the most liberating shift happens when a person breaks this illusion and accepts a transformative truth. Intention and action are not competitors. They are partners. We are partners. One without the other collapses. Intention without effort becomes fantasy. Effort without intention becomes empty. But when both align, even imperfectly, even slowly, even through struggle, That is where real spiritual growth lives. Because Allah does not judge you by how convincing your internal story sounds to yourself. He judges the sincerity of your striving. One of the most quietly persuasive lies the human mind accepts, often without resistance, is the belief that everyone else is doing the same. It is a belief that does not attack your morality directly, but slowly dissolves your sense of personal responsibility. Because once something feels socially normal, it begins to feel psychologically safe. The discomfort fades, the internal resistance softens, the conscience negotiates. It's common, it's normal, everyone does this. This is just how society works. And what makes this belief so dangerous is that it feels backed by evidence. You see it everywhere, on screens, in conversations, in habits, in culture, in daily interactions. Wrong behaviors repeated collectively begin to wear the disguise of acceptability. But truth has never been determined by majority. Normalization has never been the same as justification. Yet the human brain is wired for social alignment. It craves belonging. It fears isolation. It seeks comfort in conformity. So when surrounded by certain behaviors, the mind performs a silent recalibration. If everyone is doing it, it can't be that serious. This is not logic. This is psychological relief, because standing against a normalized pattern requires friction. It requires self-awareness. It requires tolerating the discomfort of feeling different. And the ego despises discomfort. So instead of confronting whether something is right, the mind asks a far easier question. Is this common? And once commonness becomes the measuring stick, standards collapse. Gradually, quietly, invisibly. Haksupa. Sins lose sharpness, boundaries blur, carefulness erodes. Not because conviction disappeared overnight, but because comparison diluted it. The tragedy of this belief is that it shifts accountability outward. Responsibility becomes diffused into the crowd. How can it be wrong if everyone participates? But spiritual reality has always operated on an individual axis. You are not judged as a collective mind. You are not measured by social averages. You stand alone with your choices, your awareness, your actions, your compromises. Yet comparison provides emotional anesthesia. It numbs guilt. It silences inattention. It transforms personal decisions into cultural inevitabilities. And over time, what once required justification no longer requires explanation at all. Because repetition breeds familiarity, and familiarity breeds acceptance. But history repeatedly exposes the fragility of majority logic. Entire societies normalize destructive patterns. Entire cultures drift collectively. Entire generations move in directions that feel safe simply because they are crowded. Numbers do not reduce consequence. No. Popularity does not soften truth. Frequency does not alter accountability. And Islam repeatedly dismantles this illusion by separating truth from consensus. Because guidance has never depended on crowd approval. Right and wrong do not fluctuate based on trends. You there? Yet the deeper danger of comparison lies not only in behavior, but in identity erosion. The more you measure yourself against others, the less you measure yourself against principle. The more you seek comfort in similarity, the less you cultivate conscious integrity. And slowly, awareness itself begins to weaken. Because when wrong becomes widespread, vigilance requires strength, but conformity requires none. The most liberating shift happens when a person breaks free from this mental trap and accepts a radically clarifying truth. Widespread does not mean harmless. Common does not mean safe. And popular does not mean right. Because the believer's compass was never meant to be society. It was meant to be truth. And truth does not tremble when crowds move. Perhaps one of the most comforting and most spiritually paralyzing beliefs a person can carry is the quiet reassurance, I'm not that bad. It is soft, subtle, deeply soothing to the ego. Because it does not deny flaws, does not reject mistakes, does not openly rebel, it simply minimizes urgency. Yes, I have issues, but I'm not worse than others. Yes, I make mistakes, but I'm still a good person. Oh, yes, I fall short, but I'm not that bad. And what makes this belief so psychologically dangerous is that it provides relief without requiring change. It creates a mental environment where self-reflection weakens, growth slows, and accountability becomes negotiable. Because once you accept that you are not that bad, improvement begins to feel optional rather than necessary. The ego loves comparative safety. It thrives on relative positioning. Instead of measuring alignment with truth, the mind measures distance from extremes. At least I'm not like them. At least I don't do worse. But spiritual reality has never operated on comparison. It operates on sincerity, awareness, and striving. The tragedy of this belief is not arrogance, it is complacency. It is the slow sedation of the conscience. Because major moral collapse rarely begins with open defiance, it begins with subtle comfort, with a quiet reduction of internal tension, with the soothing narrative that no immediate correction is needed. And the mind is incredibly skilled at constructing this narrative. It highlights your strengths, softens your weaknesses, contextualizes your mistakes, and protects your self-image with remarkable efficiency. But growth requires friction. Transformation requires discomfort. And I'm not that bad, it dissolves both. It removes the psychological pressure that fuels change. Because urgency is born from honest self-assessment, not comfortable self-description. What makes this belief even more deceptive is that it often contains truth. You may indeed not be that bad, but improvement has never been reserved for the worst. Spiritual elevation was never triggered only by catastrophe. The believer's journey is not about avoiding being terrible. It is about pursuing being better. Yet the ego reframes the objective. Survival replaces growth. Adequacy replaces excellence. Minimal safety replaces conscious striving. And slowly standards drift downward, not through rebellion, but through relaxation, through comfort, through the gentle surrender of higher expectations. Because once you feel good enough, the hunger for refinement fades. But Islam continuously disrupts this illusion by anchoring the believer in humility, not humiliation, humility. The recognition that no matter how far one has come, there is always distance left to travel, always sincerity to deepen, always awareness to sharpen, always habits to refine, always a heart to protect. The most dangerous state is not sinfulness. It is comfort within stagnation. It is the absence of internal urgency. It is the quiet belief that no serious recalibration is required. Because the ego does not fear being wrong. It fears being unsettled. And I'm not that bad is its favorite sedative. But liberation begins the moment this illusion breaks. The moment a person replaces comparative comfort with conscious honesty. The moment I'm not that bad, it transforms into I can be better. Because spiritual growth is not fueled by self-condemnation. It is fueled by awakened awareness. And awareness begins where comfort ends. If you've listened until this moment, pause for a second. Because this is where everything becomes personal. None of these beliefs we discussed sound dangerous when you first hear them. This is just how I am. I still have time. Our small sins don't matter. My intentions are good. Everyone else is doing the same. I'm not that bad. They sound harmless, rational, comforting even. But together, they form something incredibly powerful, a system of quiet self-deception that slowly reshapes a life without a person ever noticing the drift. This is how hearts harden without rebellion. This is how distance grows without intention. This is how years pass without transformation. Not because a person rejected truth, but because they felt safe postponing it. Because the greatest danger is not obvious destruction. The greatest danger is silent erosion. A life that feels normal while slowly moving away from awareness, away from urgency, away from conscious connection with Allah. But here is the mercy hidden inside this realization. Awareness itself is a gift. The discomfort you feel right now, that tension, that reflection, that unease, is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of life. A heart that still reacts can still change. A soul that still feels can still return. No matter how long these beliefs have lived inside your mind, they are not permanent residents. They are illusions. And illusions lose their power the moment you see them clearly. Because transformation does not begin with dramatic actions. It begins with broken illusions, with honesty, With a single decision to stop negotiating with comforting lies and start confronting liberating truths, you are not trapped by your past patterns. Time is not guaranteed. Nothing repeated is truly small. Intentions demand movement. Normalized does not mean harmless, and growth is never finished. This moment, this exact moment, is not random. It is an invitation to awaken awareness, to reclaim urgency, to rebuild mindfulness, to move, even slightly, toward a version of yourself that is more conscious, more aligned, more awake, because Allah's mercy is not waiting for your perfection. It is waiting for your sincerity. And sincerity begins now, not later.